designed to fuse your left and right brain hemispheres and feed it the most entertaining and mentally engaging topics on the planet. As we approach our ascent, please make sure your frontal, temporal and occipital lobes are in their full upright position. As you take your seat of consciousness, relax your senses and allow us to take you on a journey. We are the Intimate Strangers. Thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much for your presence this evening. We are going to be speaking to my guest, tonight about plant medicine. Just waiting for everyone to show up here. This is our Christmas end of 2019 special, and we're broadcasting live on YouTube, Twitter, DLive, Twitch, so many different platforms that we are multi-streaming to, because the way YouTube is heading is just a strange place. If you haven't heard the show before, this should be something highly enjoyable for you. So welcome to the show. If you want to chat with us, simply go to allmylinks.com/thehumanxp. Click the top where it says community invite. That will let you onto the server where you can ask questions and talk to us here. So whether you're here with us live or listening to this on the podcast version, thank you so much for your presence. Sincerely appreciated. Either way, sit back, grab a drink, and enjoy this conversation. The Human Experience is in session. My name is Xavier Katana. My guest for today is Mr. Carlos Tanner. Carlos is the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Iquitos, Peru. The Ayahuasca Foundation is an organization that was created in 2008 from Carlos's desire to spread the science of plant medicine and healing to the wider world. Carlos later went on to open the Rizobo Ayahuasca Research Center in 2017, a research and healing center which will study the effects of ayahuasca and plant medicine on such issues such as childhood trauma, chronic pain, PTSD, drug addiction, and much more. Carlos, it's a pleasure. Very excited to have you here. Welcome to HXP.
Thanks so much, Xavier. It's great to be here.
So, Carlos, such a large anticipation. Thank you again for making time to do this. Christmas was yesterday, so it's time for the holidays, and no one really wants to work, today. But I'm glad you're here, and we could talk about such an important topic. But let's start sort of from the beginning. How did you get to a point where you wanted to work in this field?
Yeah. Well, it's always a challenge to try to pick a place to start, when you're talking about a life path. I often say that it all started with the movie Return of the Jedi, because when I was just a little kid, I saw the Ewoks and they had a shaman. At least it was depicted as a shaman, and that became like my favorite figurine for some reason. And that was the first time I ever really knew that there was such a thing as a shaman, I guess. But later it kind of became more real for me, I guess, when I started reading Carlos Castaneda's books in high school. And then, of course, when I started experimenting with psychedelics like mushrooms in high school and then into college. I started to feel like that there was something a little bit different about me, I guess. I didn't really want to like go to a party or something. I enjoyed being out in the woods. And then my life just continued on. After college, I got a job, a career job, working as a production manager of a nonprofit. Of a news weekly called The Valley Advocate in Western Massachusetts, and that was kind of like, oh, here I am. This is going to be my life. I have my career, so I got a nice house, had a nice car. Started checking the things off of the list that we're supposed to do when we become successful. But a couple years in, I wasn't happy. I was actually like starting to feel more and more depressed, and I really felt like this was like not satisfying. This concept of success was not what I had imagined it to be, and I began drinking more, started using different drugs, not like psychedelics for exploration anymore. I started using opiates to try to dull myself, to try to tolerate the success, I guess, and that led me to kind of spiral out of control and slowly like spiral my life down into the depths of addiction. Became a heroin addict, but still worked. I was keeping my job and tolerating it by having myself be numb to it, to the dissatisfaction, until that culminated in me waking up in my car at like 2:00 in the morning underwater. I had blacked out behind the wheel while driving high on drugs and drunk, and had to figure out where the hell I was, climbed out the window of my car, swam to the shore, and at that point realized that if I didn't do something drastic, my life was going to end.
Wow.
And so the concept of success and, tolerating it, whatever, all of that didn't matter anymore. It was more about survival and becoming healthy again.
Sure.
And 2 weeks later, I got an email from a friend, seemingly randomly, that informed me that she was in Iquitos, Peru, that she had met these two men from Russia who had found a shaman that they were drinking ayahuasca with, and she had no idea that I had driven into the river. She, was traveling and didn't know any of that news, but decided to write to me to see if I wanted to come down. So I took that as an omen, and I booked a flight and flew down to Peru, met her, drank ayahuasca, and I guess you could say the rest is history. But the reality was that I spent the most profound 3 weeks of my life in a healing process that uncovered the traumas that were at the root of my addiction and the root of so many other problems in my life, and came to an understanding of what healing was on such a deep level, and also an expanded view of what reality is on such a deep level. And during that time, the shaman, or as they call them in Peru, curandero, whose name was Don Juan, he told me that this was my path to be a healer. My experiences in my own process were pointing me in the same direction, and he invited me to become his student and be his apprentice and live with him, and I accepted his offer. And so that was in June of 2003, and then in January of 2004, I moved to Iquitos permanently, and I lived with him for 4 years. And at the end of 3 years, I started coming up with this idea that would eventually become the Ayahuasca Foundation.
Wow. I mean, it's such an amazing story. We've covered, various aspects of addiction on the show. We've had Dr. Gabor Mate. I'm sure you know who that is. And
of course,
he does a lot of work, as you know, on addiction. And I mean, there's something about being here. I mean, whether it's being incarnate here or what, but there's something about being in pain and wanting to somehow mask that suffering. And according to Dr. Mate, what's happening with an addict is that they, that's what they're trying to do. They're in so much pain that they're just trying to mask that pain level they're in.
I agree completely. I mean, I'm so fortunate to be able to read his work, and I'm so thankful for his contributions for sure. But that's exactly it. You know, that's exactly what it was for me as well. Like the addiction to drugs was an attempt at self-medication, and I think that's what's happening for so many people. Um, when it comes to what you could call emotional or even spiritual afflictions, modern medicine just doesn't it's not very adequate at treating them. And people go to therapy for years and years and years and don't really get that far because in my view the trauma that's caused or that causes the need for drug addiction or other addictions. People express that they try to medicate themselves, not necessarily with substances, but maybe with actions, with gambling addictions or shopping or whatever it might be. Like there are other ways that it gets expressed. But all of those causes, the root causes, which I refer generally to as traumas, they are all happening at heightened sense of emotion. There are heightened emotional states, heightened perceptive ability states, which comes from having those heightened emotion states. And so if you're just sitting on a couch and you're relaxed, then you're not going to be able to reach the depths that those heightened states allowed you to achieve. And that's where psychedelic therapy becomes so valuable. And that's why ayahuasca is so powerful, because it replicates that heightened state, except it doesn't have fear to replicate it. And so you have a controlled environment where you actually have access to those deeper levels of consciousness where the roots are planted, so to speak. And you can then pull those roots up, as in the metaphor.
Yeah.
I've come to look at it a little bit differently, which is using a reference of states of matter. And so, we're very familiar with the three most common states of matter of water, which would be vapor, liquid, and solid, or gas, liquid, and solid, the common three states. And those, I feel, could be related to the three states of our being, which would be our mind, our thoughts, and the liquid related to our emotions, and then the solid related to our physical bodies. But those can also be related to the three states of matter in consciousness, the gas state being the state of ideas, and the liquid state being the state of beliefs, and the solid state being the state of truth. And the truths reside in your body, and the truths essentially become the foundation that you build your realities on, your personal truths. And beliefs, though, they flow more like your emotions. They can change. It's easier to change your beliefs than it is to change your truths. And the ideas are the most fleeting. You can have ideas come and go all the time. And then you condense them into beliefs when there's a particular resonance to an idea. And then a belief can sink down into freezing, so to speak. You can solidify a belief into a truth. But when you solidify the belief into a truth, it then begins to reside in your body. And that we would call the subconscious, because it's just much more difficult to access. It's solid, And so once you solidify a belief into a truth, it's very challenging to liquefy it again, to bring it out of the realm of solid. And that, to me, is what happens when you have a trauma. You take an idea that becomes a belief through the heightened emotional state, and then it becomes solidified into a truth inside your body. And it's just very, very challenging to liquefy, to transform that truth back into the state of beliefs and ideas so that it can be let go. But when you use a substance like ayahuasca, which is essentially an amplifier of perceptive ability, then you have a much greater access to the solidified state.
Hmm.
You have an expanded awareness of what is, what you are, and what the world is around you, because you can see beyond the visible spectrum and hear beyond the audible spectrum, and all of your senses can sense beyond their normal limitations of biology.
Hmm.
And by doing so, you can gain much greater access to those truths. And then you can liquefy a truth. You can transform a truth back into the realm of beliefs and ideas if it doesn't serve you, if it's detrimental to you, which a trauma, of course, would be. But you can also take ideas and beliefs that are positive and helpful for you and solidify them. Replace a detrimental truth with a positive truth.
Sure.
And that, to me, is the essence of the healing process within the ayahuasca tradition.
I absolutely love that analogy so much. I mean, what is the human body mostly made of is water, right? So, I mean, it's perfect. And I mean, yeah, and the cells contain memory. So, when you experience trauma, it's like the consciousness is a crystalline structure, and it does store, information. And in my experience with ayahuasca, it's kind of like a closet door that's been closed and the light is off, and you forgot about it in your house, in your mind. You've forgotten it's there. And in my experience, what ayahuasca does is it opens that door, it turns the light on, and one at a time it pulls out, something that you've forgotten about, a trauma that's affecting you, and you look at it, you observe it, and you get to play with it from different angles, and somehow that affects the healing process.
Without a doubt. I mean, to give the example of my personal healing experience and how it relates to what the ideas that I just put forth are, I had I feel like my life was basically very, very good. I wasn't, my parents didn't abuse me. They didn't beat me or anything. I wasn't like in the presence of, an abusive relationships in my family and my life or anything. But I did have some traumas, and so I was sexually molested in a park by a stranger when I was young, and that definitely had a powerful negative influence on my life. But there was a particular moment in my life that I completely forgot about, that I had no idea was there. And in the second ayahuasca ceremony that I attended, I relived that experience. Like, all of a sudden I was 8 years old again, and I was in my room. My brother, who shared my room, was crying, and I was listening using a glass against the wall to my parents on the other side of the wall in their bedroom having an argument because my father had lost his job and they were fighting about money and finances, and I was the youngest of 4 children. And for some reason, my mom decided to say that they didn't have money for me, and named me, as if to suggest that if they only had 3 kids, then they would have been okay, And then my parents went on to get a divorce. And I totally forgot that moment had happened. But right there in the ayahuasca ceremony, I relived this memory. And as soon as I started, as soon as I saw the scene playing out, I was like, oh my God, I totally remember. I remember this night.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And then I saw how I had taken that moment and decided that it was my fault.
Mm.
My mom had said me, she had named me as the person that the family couldn't afford to have, and from that moment on, I took it on myself that it was my fault that my parents got a divorce. And I was a burden on my family, and I began pushing away my parents' love. Like they would want to get me new clothes for school and I would refuse, and they'd want to like throw a birthday party for me and I would adamantly refuse, like, and refuse to accept any presents from them. And that like started to infect all of the relationships that I had as I got older and older. This one seed of an inaccurate interpretation of a particular incident infected my entire life to the point where I couldn't allow someone to love me when I was an adult. And I didn't feel like I deserved it. You know, I had like transformed that burden to my family to a burden of the world. And that led to this depression that couldn't really be resolved. And I didn't even know that it had happened. You know, I didn't even remember. But then right there in the ceremony, I reinterpreted, more accurately interpreted that same situation, but in that heightened state. And I was able to override the original misinterpretation and replace it. Essentially, like, took a truth that had been in solid form in my life for decades and removed it. And I released it into the realm of belief and ideas and let it go, and then replaced it with a more accurate truth that served me better. And then the next day, I wrote letters to my mother and my father, apologizing to them and asking for their forgiveness and letting them know that I forgave them, and starting the process to regain all of that harmony and balance and love in my relationships.
Wow.
And of course, like, it doesn't just fix everything,
Right.
because the effects are there. They've been decades of effects, so you have to like work at it for a long time.
Yeah.
But at least I had the right foundation to do that. And so that was a personal example of how it happened for me. And I think that if you were to talk to pretty much every single person in the world, they all have some story that resembles that to some degree, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really interesting to me, you know, how much of a profound effect ayahuasca can have. I remember after the first time that I drank the tea, the first time I had a very deep awareness and realization that alcohol was a poison. It was poisonous to my body, and I never drank alcohol again. I still don't. I just have no need for it, you know? And I mean, there's also something about the Western paradigm of Western medicine that kind of is this sort of revolving door. You know, it doesn't seem to seek cures for patients. It seems to want to get you on drugs, sort of, you know, mask the symptoms and, you know, bring you back next month. And I think the people that I encounter that have this interest in plant medicine, or namely ayahuasca, they're curious about it because they've met this wall in Western medicine, and they are, to be honest, they're just desperate. They want to be healed. They want to be, you know, for lack of a better word, normal. They want to feel like they're making progress somewhere within themselves, you know? And so they're searching for, you know, retreats that are thousands of miles away. And you know, it's a weird system that we're in. Would you agree?
Definitely. I mean, it's hard to look at where we are now and not have some level of some sort of kind of conspiracy theory, which is such a shame, you know. But I definitely feel like we had a system of medicine that was trying to bring about health and happiness for people, and that somehow was replaced by this massive profit corporate, you know, this corporatism of medicine that we have now, which is exactly like what you say, and it makes total sense. I mean, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you're trying to make money, and the way that you do that is selling medicine to sick people, you clearly do not want everyone to be healthy. You know, you're like, hey, this is our whole livelihood for our shareholders to profit. we need as many sick people as possible. Do you really want people to be healthy? If anything, you want to find out ways that you can get people to be sick, because that's going to gain more customers. So it's that's the kind of the conspiracy theory element of it, where we have what we jokingly kind of call a healthcare system, where it doesn't really seem like people care about you at all, and they're not even trying to have you be healthy. And that's not the doctor, though. That's not the nurse. Like, I think that human to human interaction is like, people do want you to be healthy. Your doctor does want you to be healthy, except that they went to a school that was funded by a pharmaceutical company, and the curriculum that they studied was developed by people that sat on the board of pharmaceutical companies. And so they learned essentially to become prescribers.
Right.
And now in the US, where you see advertisements for prescription drugs, which is pretty ridiculous that we even have that, but they don't even refer to the doctor sometimes. They say, ask your prescriber for more information.
Yeah.
Like, just, go to the guy who has to write you the piece of paper to get this because you want this drug,
Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing. I guess we could, harp on that all night if we wanted to, but, kind of moving on here, I was going through some of the videos that you've done, and there was something that I recall that you mentioned that I really want to talk about, because I mean, I guess this part of it fascinates me. I feel like, in many of the visions that I've had in my ayahuasca experiences, it seems like there is a sort of battle between light and dark, like, and I mean that, in exactly those terms, like the light side, good versus evil. And I think you mentioned in one of your sessions with the tea, you were battling a demon. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My first teacher, he had a particular perspective that was very kind of in line, I would say, with Western medicine in a way, in the sense that he felt like you needed to be a warrior and you had to have your sword in the spiritual dimension. I was like a samurai. And in the beginning, I thought that was super cool, to be a samurai. Like, in my visions, I would be this badass samurai and like chopping stuff up with my knife, with my sword, because it fit into my view also. Like, as a Westerner, like, you fight an illness, you fight a disease, you kill the disease, and so that was at that time. Like, that story, which I believe was in La Pequeña Muerte, when I was talking about that. I'm thankful. Thank you for watching those videos, by the way. But yeah, so early on, I believe that was just my third ceremony. I found a vine, like, just looked down and saw that there was a vine growing out of my belly into the ground, and decided to follow it. So my spirit left my body and like started climbing down through the earth, following this vine, and it followed it like through the earth all the way to the other side of the earth into outer space. And at the very end of it was a giant black shiny pterodactyl. And you got to put this into the context that I have drank ayahuasca twice before this, and now I'm having this vision. Right. And as soon as I saw the pterodactyl, I was just like, you were driving the car, because it had always bothered me, like how I had blacked out behind the wheel. I kind of, when I say I blacked out behind the wheel and drove into a river, people often imagine that I just blacked out and swerved off the road. But that's not how it happened. I blacked out and drove down Main Street, took a left at the light, went through 2 lights through the center of town, took a left on Route 10, drove like 4.5 miles, took a left down a road I'd never been down, drove this windy road down until it hit a cornfield, drove across the cornfield through the like cornfield, and then drove into the river. Like I had this crazy like specific route that I had driven. And so when I woke up, I was like, where the hell am I? Like, how did I get here? Like, who was driving the car? I kept thinking, like, who was driving the car? Like I was blacked out. Like, how was I driving and not conscious? And so as soon as I saw the pterodactyl, I was like, you were driving the car. And and I just pulled out my sword. This was before I don't think he'd even told me that I needed one, but I just had one, and I chopped that thing up into pieces. And then I was afraid that it was going to, I don't know, Terminator 3, like melt back into itself again. So I pulled out a laser that I had, just happened to have. This is all in my vision, and lasered the pieces into this dust that floated in space, because we were floating in outer space. And what was that really like? What was really happening there? I don't know. But I definitely know that when I did that, I had just defeated a demon. I had just, with my own force, my own power, my own strength, I had just vanquished a demon that was in my life, that had been attached to me, that had been connected to me. And there's just so many very fast interpretations, very fast decisions that you make. It was a vine coming out of my stomach, and it was perched on this vine, and somehow I just quickly knew that it was using that vine to take energy from me. And it was like putting thoughts into my head, and all of these things just quickly became interpretations as soon as I was presented with the scenario. And so in defeating all of that, I then had all of this like liberation, like, I'm free, like I don't have that demon. And I don't even care really what that whole thing was, except that I knew that afterward I was completely empowered. I felt like no one was controlling me anymore. Like I was in control of my life. I was taking full responsibility for my actions. And in that moment, like that second, I knew that I would never do drugs again. Like I was, I was done. Like that was it. I connected a representation of my addiction to that creature. And when I defeated it, then I defeated my addiction. And that was how it played out.
That's amazing. What a profound story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, I think people have, some, relevance to that, something in their lives perhaps they don't feel. And, I feel like that the sense of this is increasing more and more. I don't know if it's just a sign of the times. I don't know if it's like a Kali Yuga thing. Maybe it's just the way things are now. And maybe this is how we learn and grow the most, is through these battles in our lives. And whether, it's a demon or whether it's something else, there is that. You're fighting with that. And, there are some people who are called to this role of ayahuasca. And I know for me, it's in my DNA. It's in my blood. And, for you felt something similar. So, if we could get into, you run a center in Peru. How did you get to a point where, you mentioned a little bit about, how much your life transitioned into something that you changed completely, but, what's involved in opening a center in Peru? I mean, which is basically in the middle of the jungle, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, getting back to like just what you were describing and the state that we're in right now, you don't have to go that far back in modern history. And thankfully, you don't have to go back at all, because there are cultures that are fully intact, like non-Westernized cultures still exist on the planet, thankfully. And that's who I work with. down in the Amazon rainforest. But even our ancestors, no matter where you're from, like no matter who you are, all of our ancestors practiced a form of plant medicine that had at its core belief the existence of us, like our existence as spirit, and that all of nature was made of spirit. Like every animal had a spirit and every plant had a spirit, and we are essentially spirits. And that isn't that far back. You don't have to go that far back to have that be our own ancestral wisdom. But it's like in the span of human history, it's an incredibly new idea to abandon that concept of spirit. And science is really to blame. Like I don't want to be negative towards science, because it made so much sense for why science came to be and why it wanted to start out, from the beginning, I guess, or from scratch. But science took this notion where, let's start with the stuff that you can touch, let's start with the easy stuff, the solid stuff, and we'll work our way up. And so spirit just kind of fell by the wayside. It became removed, from our consciousness. And then human culture kind of started spiraling out of control. And so I definitely feel like when it comes to these concepts of demons, or the concepts that the indigenous people still use today in their understanding of the world, it is still within a spiritual dimension. It's their paradigm, the spiritual paradigm or the indigenous paradigm. And we don't have that. And I don't think it's coincidence that we don't have a spiritual paradigm and we are all suffering from depression. We are, and it fits consumerism perfect. Like the corporatism, like, oh, you feel like you're empty inside because you don't have the understanding of what you're truly filled with, which is love and spirit. Then buy stuff.
Go buy something.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so we're all coming to find that now, though. We're all kind of waking up to that. And like you were saying, we're all starting to feel this intuition that we need to get back to what our ancestors were doing. But unfortunately, we don't have that. I don't have the ability to go see where my ancestors, nobody's doing it anymore. It's forgotten, it's gone. And so we're traveling to the distant places left on the planet where those ancestral traditions are not gone.
Sure. And
where they're still being practiced. And so thankfully that they are being practiced.
Right.
And now even science is coming around. It's kind of coming full circle to the point where even scientists have to acknowledge that there is certainly something beyond what our normal understanding is, and that there's whether you want to call them dimensions, although that's certainly being a word being used by science now, that there are many, many dimensions that are existent, but we aren't able to perceive them due to our biological limitations. We're even within our scientific paradigm, we're coming around. It's just that those details of that aspect of understanding within current science is not permeating into general consciousness the way that biology is or chemistry is, But I think that that's just a matter of time. And I feel like there's a coming together now where you have science actually looking directly at ancestral traditions and basically opening up to a new understanding that hopefully will be permeating the future of humankind and be what brings us back to harmony and balance. And that's where, to get all the way back to your original question,
sure,
I don't feel like I did much to start the Ayahuasca Foundation or to start the research center or, all of that. It just played itself out, I just kind of followed the path. I just did what I was supposed to do. That's what it always has felt like. And so now, looking back, I look back and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. Like, this is so great that this happened, but I can't really say that I did that much. Of course, I made decisions. I acted, and I had faith, and I trusted. But all of the people that it took to make the Ayahuasca Foundation, and all the people that it took to get the research projects and the funding from the UK government and all of that, like, I didn't do much. Those people just showed up,
Mm-hmm.
and I believed in it. Like, I believed that it was going to happen. And the reason I believed in it is because Spirit told me, like, I had ayahuasca showing me the way. And then I had the bioluminescent tree Noya Rao, like, literally just setting it all up for the research. The research center belongs to a tree.
What do you mean?
It's so true. But I basically received an email in 2013 saying, hey, we're a charity organization in the U.S. Called the Granttown Foundation, and I'm so thankful for the Granttown Foundation. I encourage anyone to check out their website, granttown.org. I'm so thankful for them. And they offered to fund the building of a research center if I would build it.
Wow.
And I knew it was going to be a huge project. And so to help me make that decision as to whether or not I should do this, I went into the jungle and I did a diet with a bioluminescent tree called Noya Rao, a tree that's leaves glow in the dark. And if you're watching on YouTube, there's a picture on the right-hand side of my teacher, Don Enrique, up above, and down below there's some blue leaves. There's a photograph of the leaves that are actually glowing. Yeah. And so I did a diet with this tree, which essentially meant that I ingested it, and I chose to fast. So I fasted for 8 days. And so I only ingested the extract of a root, of the root of this tree, and nothing else for 8 days. And I connected with this tree. And so when I walked out of the jungle, I had drawn the architectural plans for the research center on a piece of paper with a pen. And so that was clear that, yes, I was going to accept this offer and I was going to take on this project. But it was really Noya Rao, this tree, that brought me to that decision. And Noya Rao is what I feel brought me the researchers, because I have a degree in philosophy and a degree in art. I was a graphic artist as my career in the U.S., and I knew nothing about research. And here I am building a research center in the middle of the jungle. And people would, of course, ask me how are you going to do the research? And I would say, I don't know. I don't know, but I feel once I get it close to built, the people will show up, the right people will show up. And sure enough, a psychiatrist from the National Health Services came and did a retreat. And he had met one of my facilitators randomly in a bar in Costa Rica or something. And he did a retreat. His mind was blown. He went back and he took it upon himself to write up all the grant proposals, and he won the grant from the National Health Services. The UK government actually gave him the money to set up his research.
That's
and
incredible.
So all we did was host it, and then him, Simon Ruffle is his name, and Nigel Netzban, the two of them came and they set up their own research and they did it, and the findings are stellar, and they're going to be published in the next couple months. But I just 2 weeks ago I was with them looking at the results that they just finally finished compiling all the data at the end of this year, and it's going to make people's jaws drop to see just how effective this medicine is.
Wow. I mean, there's so much there, Carlos. I don't know how to package that or unpackage it. I mean, okay, so this bioluminescent tree that led to this sort of enlightened state of consciousness where, you're inspired to draw out the blueprints for, this, what would be the center that you're doing all this research in, and, this grant that you got, and the people kind of appearing in your life as they needed to. And I fully prescribe to that same idea that And it's kind of how I built this show and everything around here is, the people who are supposed to sort of appear do, and it's always kind of been that way. And not to say it's not a struggle, it's not hard. It is really hard to do what we're doing, but we push forward. I want to get into love. You talk about love and forgiveness. If you could touch on those two things, that would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think the way that I look at, the way that I look at everything is through consciousness now. Like my philosophy, if you want to call it that, is that everything is made of consciousness. So the energy of the universe is consciousness. Every cell is consciousness. Every atom is consciousness. Like there is nothing but consciousness. That is my personal philosophy. But of course, there's so many different kinds of consciousness, just like we were talking about states of matter. And ultimately, those states of matter could be described as frequencies. Like a lower frequency will put you down into a more solid state of matter, and a higher frequency of vibrational energy would put you in a higher state, like a liquid or eventually gas, or the highest of all, the plasma state, which I didn't really talk about, which is to me spirit and consciousness, in that reference before that I was making. And so love is in the realm of the highest vibration. And so if you picture a wavelength, like a line that goes up and down, and you picture one that goes up and down with, very, very close to each other. So the peaks and the troughs of that wave are so close to each other that it almost just looks like a band. That is the frequency of love. And so musically speaking, like if you have a note and it has a frequency, you want it will sound good if it resonates with another note that has a symmetry to those peaks and troughs in their vibrational frequency. Mm-hmm. But love you can't not be in harmony with it. There's so many peaks and so many troughs that, like, no matter where your vibrational frequency is, it's always going to resonate with love. And so when you're in a state of love, like, everything is in resonance. Everything, fits. Everything feels right. Nothing feels wrong when you're in that state. And we fall out of that by thinking that love is something that we have to get from someone else. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is part of, like, the sad state we're in, where we don't have spirit as our core identity. Like I was mentioning before, we think that we're individuals that are bodies, and therefore we are alone essentially in the world. And even though we have relationships, we are always, like, alone as a body. But when you have spirit as your core, and everything has spirit as its core, then you have this universal spirit that you're all a part of something. And the simplest term for that is nature. We talk about nature as if it's something outside of ourselves. Like, it's very common to say, I love being in nature. But we rarely say that we are nature. And yet we are. Of course we are. We are walking on this planet as animals, and every other animal is nature, but not us. And that's just inaccurate. And so if we could get back to an idea that we are nature, then I think very quickly we can get back into the state that by loving nature, which I think is a pretty easy thing to do. When you see a beautiful mountain or a beautiful stream or a waterfall or just a flower blooming or hear birds chirping, or even when you see a child smiling, like it still has that aspect of nature. If we include ourselves in that, then we can easily bring that love to ourselves and feel that love from nature. Because nature loves us the same way it loves every tree, every plant, every animal. And I know that might sound like some hippie crap or something, but But it really is the reality. Like, that vibrational frequency of energy is permeating all of existence. But our consciousness is so powerful that we can deny ourselves that. And in the same respect, like, you got to where you are because you felt that you trusted this vision. You had a vision and you knew it. You like knew that this was going to be it. And to the point where even if there was an obstacle, you were going to find a way around that obstacle or through that obstacle because you believed in it.
Right.
And that's what it was for me too. Like, I was building a research center and I had so many problems. I mean, it got hit by lightning at one point, like crazy stuff happened. But I just knew to such a degree that it was meant to be, that I just persevered. I just did what I had to do. And I think that every success story has that underlying theme that people just knew. And that's why they were able to persevere. And when an opportunity comes and you don't have that belief, then it's very easy to say, nah, that could never happen, Oh, that door could never open for me, kind of mentality. And then you just don't walk through the open door, or you don't allow that opportunity to reveal itself, or to, provide the gifts that it is there to provide. But when you do believe in it, then you're ready to step through that door. You're expecting it. You're just like, oh, well, an opportunity is going to come. I know it will because I believe in this. And that, to me, is the result of reconnecting with nature and allowing yourself to bring yourself up to that resonance of love and that frequency of energy.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a powerful statement. I think that realizing, love is within ourselves, and I think so much of something that happens is that people are seeking that connection so much with someone else and looking for something that's already inside of themselves as, I don't know, as a means to get it, through someone else's validation or acceptance, or maybe it's like a neurological thing that happens in the brain. But, even that is short-lived, until you find out that when it comes from yourself, it's the most lasting and the most pure and the most real. But, unfortunately, the way our culture is set up, it's not very aligned towards demonstrating or showing you that, that love is within yourself. I mean, even with, this idea of, Christmas and consumerism and the way the pharmaceutical industry is, I mean, there's so many different adversarial sort of avenues that a human being can experience when, you're just living an ordinary life and you're trying to get by. And, especially this time of year, I think it really affects people. They look out at, they look externally at the lives of others. Maybe it's on Instagram, maybe it's on Twitter, whatever, wherever it is, but you're comparing your life to theirs. And you're thinking in your mind like, oh, okay, well, this guy has it, this person has it made. This person has everything that I desire and want in my life. And then somehow you just feel like crap because of that. I recently had someone tell me exactly that they just don't feel like they're in the right place in their life because, everyone else around them seems to be more put together, but that's just, that couldn't be further from the truth. That's just not it just appears that way. Would you agree, Carlos?
100%. I mean, that's where I sum it up by just saying nature knows, but I spend a lot of time in the Amazon rainforest, and I mean, like, in the jungle, and the trees, the forest, like the whole environment, it just always has the answers, like every answer, and yet comparisons are just futile. Like, in nature, you would never say, "Oh, the pine tree is so much better than the oak tree." Like you would never. That's kind of a ridiculous thought. The pine tree is what it is. The oak tree is what it is. They're totally different. The pine tree has all of these qualities, and that's so cool. And the oak tree has all these qualities, and isn't that cool? And that's how it is with nature. But for some reason, when we want to compare ourselves and try to make that claim, we want to like try to say like, oh, that one's better and I'm not as good, or I'm better than that one. And it's kind of just useless. And that to me is another example of how reconnecting with nature, like looking at trees and plants and seeing how they do it. Like they've pretty much perfected it, They've got life down. They're not questioning their realities much, They're not wondering if they're worth their value. They're in 100% faith and trust all the time, and they're always thriving. If given the right environment, every plant will thrive, and they'll never question it. And that's like, to me, the perfect example of what we're supposed to be doing. And I know it's weird to like talk about plants being your mentors, but that is exactly what plant medicine is about. And honestly, that is exactly what ancestral wisdom is about. Like all of our ancestors were very closely connected with a particular plant or a group of plants that enabled them to regain or maintain their harmony, health, and balance in their lives. And I mean, this was happening for tens of thousands of years in human history, and it's still happening. And so even though it sounds weird to say it in the state that we're in now and the way that our lives are, it was certainly not a weird idea for tens of thousands of years in human history. And I think it's just high time for us to get back to looking at plants again and plant medicine again. And thankfully that is what's happening. In fact, on February 20th, there's going to be the Thank You Plant Medicine movement, the social media movement, where everyone is encouraged to use the hashtag Thank You Plant Medicine and share a story about how plant medicine helped them in their healing process. And I think that's awesome.
Very cool. I mean, I would agree 100%. I would say that plants are much smarter than human beings and probably more intelligent than we will ever be. And there is a sort of networked intelligence, consciousness that understands the nature of the universe. I mean, we as humans, I think we like to think we know what's going on, but it's not. That's just not how it works. We have no clue what's going on here. And plants have, and ayahuasca, namely as a teacher, I think it will remind you of that. And if you fight that, it will remind you of that in a not so gentle way. So I mean, if an ego thing is your problem, then I don't know. But there does seem to be this resurgence of psychedelics that I don't really like that term, but that's the one that we have right now. But there does seem to be this resurgence in awareness of plant medicine and the research that's coming out. I mean, we're seeing it become legalized, like mushrooms are becoming legalized, and there are institutions like Johns Hopkins that are opening, and the work that MAPS is doing. I mean, there's a bunch of institutions right now that are pushing this research out into the wider public.
Totally. And I love it. I mean, it's so crazy. I started living in Peru almost 16 years ago and started the Ayahuasca Foundation 11 years ago. And when I started the Ayahuasca Foundation, the idea that ayahuasca might be legal and that all, plant medicine might be legal, and that research organizations were going to be studying it, and that psychedelic therapy was going to be a term, we're not far away. Like 5 years from now, you might go to a psychedelic therapist for your treatment of depression or anxiety or PTSD or something like that. And that is, to me, really fantastic. And a lot of that is just because people are starting to realize just how powerful we are. To me, the pharmaceutical industry pushed it too far. They were like too greedy. If they had been like moderately greedy, they probably could have kept us going for a while. But now we're just turning our backs on them. The human race is just fed up with it,
Yeah.
and so we're empowering ourselves, and so grateful for John Hopkins University and Imperial College, which also announced their grant to build a psychedelic therapy research center in the UK, and to King's College that's helping fund the research that we're doing at the Ayahuasca Foundation, and the NHS. I mean, how crazy is it that a government is funding ayahuasca
Right.
research? That is the
It's
future, to
amazing.
me, looks bright. It looks very, very bright. And people are returning to using plants the way that their ancestors did, and not, they're not going full native, so to speak. It's being blended with the developments that we have made, because it's not like modern culture was total crap.
Hmm.
There's been some really wonderful developments in technology. I'm certainly not against technology. The fact that you and I are talking in this manner and so
Sure.
many people are listening is amazing.
Right.
So I do envision like an incredible future, but that respects and honors the wisdom of nature and incorporates it. And now with the environmental movements as well, like I'm really hopeful for the future personally. Like I think it's a pretty cool time to be alive.
I mean, it's definitely an interesting time to be alive. I would say we are on the precipice, or in as far as a balance goes, there is. It does seem to be that we're at a tipping point where people are becoming more conscious of what's going on. We're becoming more conscious of our footprint here. We're realizing that we can no longer sort of sustain the way that we've been living in this consumerism-based society, and people are starting to wake up to that slowly but surely, and hopefully we get to a point where more people are acting on this, and taking action, and doing something for their local communities. Like it doesn't have to necessarily be an adventure, or heading out to the Amazon rainforest. I mean, you can start to connect with the people around you that are also interested in this, and form groups. That I think that would be a really great thing. I mean, if that was in my area, I would have gone to that easily, at first. Carlos, we're running out of time, man. This flew by. I want to give you a chance to kind of wrap this together. If it sounds like this was your mission, and we talked a bit in the pre-interview, and I asked you if this was something you felt was programmed into your DNA, and you said no. So I'm just curious, how you would kind of tie all this together, maybe for the people who are searching for this medicine. Maybe they're struggling with different aspects of trauma. They're wondering if ayahuasca is for them or not. How do you wrap this together?
Right. Well, there's a lot of different paths to take, of course, and ayahuasca is certainly one of them. I have a bias towards ayahuasca, believe it or not. I definitely feel like it is one of the most effective ways at treating trauma, and that's the particular focus of the research that we're doing, and the results have just been phenomenal, like I mentioned, in the ability of ayahuasca traditional therapy, because it's not just ayahuasca. There's a whole group of plant medicines that are involved in collaboration with the ayahuasca ceremonies. But to me, like I said, it's all about nature, and like you were talking about, you don't have to go far to connect with nature. There's a park if you live in the city. There's your backyard if you live with a backyard. There are gardens. Luckily there's nature everywhere, and just by connecting with it, and by connecting with it, what does that mean? I really just mean like just sitting in the grass, like touching the tree, like feeling the leaves of a plant, something very, very simple. Plants are always in this harmonious state. They're always in a state of balance. They don't get thrown off. Their consciousness is rock solid. And they can share that with us. They can bring us to a balanced state. But if you are troubled by trauma and you are troubled by anxiety and crippled by depression, ayahuasca is definitely a fantastic option. Our center offers programs that range from 1 week to 8 weeks. And if you feel like it is your calling also to be a healer with plant medicine, we have training programs or educational courses that we offer too. And so if you visit the website ayahuascafoundation.org, you can check out that information, and soon we'll be publishing the research on our own website, but that research will be published in over 10 journals in the next few months. But beyond all of it, like I think that my greatest advice would be to try to condense the ideas of trusting in nature and trusting that you are a part of nature and that you are on the right path. Sometimes we can feel lost, and sometimes we can think that we're totally going in the wrong direction. But having trust in everything working out, it will help you put one foot in front of the other and start moving forward. And so there are these little things that we can do, and trusting in the process, trusting that it will all work out, putting your faith in something bigger than yourself, which I think is nature, which you are, will be helpful in allowing you to figure things out, allowing you to find the right path for you. And it's all going to work out. Like, I guarantee it will all work out.
That is an important perspective, I think, to have, just to like you said, to put, one foot in front of the other. And a lot of people need that. A lot of people need just to find the ability to do that. Carlos, where can people find your work?
Yeah, like I said, ayahuascafoundation.org is our a nonprofit organization, and we have programs that you can check out on that website. I do have a YouTube series that's also Ayahuasca Foundation on YouTube, where I just did this year a 10-part series on lessons of ayahuasca, things that you can do in your life today that were taught to me by plant medicine. And yeah, I am always available. So if you ever want to write to me, you can reach me through the website as well, through the Contact Us page, and I'll definitely respond. And I also am happy to do calls if people want to speak with me in person.
Perfect. Carlos, I sincerely appreciate your time. Guys, that's going to wrap it up for us here at HXP. Wow. I mean, we didn't drop any packets or any frames tonight. I was really happy at the quality of the stream, and I appreciate everyone that was here. I know it's the holidays and everyone's with their family, so I sincerely appreciate it. If you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure you click like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on the podcast version, maybe leave us a review, positive or negative. I definitely read all those. If you want to join the community, get to allmylinks.com/thehumanxp, and there is an invite code at the top of that. You can come and join us. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back here next week. I didn't take any time off at all for you guys. So we will be back on January 2nd with a fresh episode for you guys. Thank you guys so much for listening. We're going to get out of here. Good night.